There is a dog lying on a grave in Budapest, Hungary. He has been there for 7 years. His name is Capitan. His owner, Miguel Guzman, died in 2006. Capitan was not at the funeral. He was not brought to the cemetery. No one showed him the way. And yet, somehow, within days of the burial, Capitan found the grave on his own, in a cemetery he had never been taken to, and lay down beside it. He stayed. For 7 years, staff at the cemetery fed him. Visitors photographed him. Journalists wrote about him. And through all of it, Capitan did not leave. He slept beside that headstone every single night, as though his only remaining purpose in the world was to be present for someone who could no longer know he was there. We tell ourselves this is loyalty. We reach for that word quickly, the way you reach for something familiar in the dark. But is loyalty really what this is? Or is something else happening? Something older, deeper, and far more biologically strange than the comfortable stories we tell about the animals who share our homes? Dogs live short lives, on average 10 to 13 years, some breeds far less. And yet in those years, they form bonds, develop emotional responses, read human faces, carry grief, experience joy, and undergo something that scientists are only now beginning to understand as a genuine interior life. This is not a story about pets. This is a story about consciousness, evolution, and the most unusual interspecies relationship in the history of life on Earth. This is the emotional truth about dogs. Begin with a number. Somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, scientists still debate the exact figure. A wolf walked toward a human fire and did not run. This is, when you sit with it, deeply strange. Every other large predator on Earth maintained its distance. The tiger, the bear, the hyena, they circled, they watched, they kept the boundary between wildness and civilization intact. But some wolves crossed it. Some wolves, under circumstances we still do not fully understand, chose proximity over safety. They chose human company. And then something happened that has no true parallel in natural history. Over millennia, through what scientists now describe as the most accelerated and dramatic case of domestication ever recorded, those wolves became something new. They became dogs. Not tame wolves, not wolves that tolerate humans, something genuinely different at the genetic level, at the behavioral level, and, here is where it gets genuinely unsettling, at the neurological level. A dog is not a wolf in a collar. A dog is an entirely new kind of mind. In 2016, a study published in the journal Science Advances analyzed the genomes of modern dogs against their wolf ancestors and found changes not just in coat color or body size, those are the obvious cosmetic differences, but in genes directly linked to behavior, social bonding, and the processing of fear. 3 genes in particular stood out: GTF2I, GTF2IRD1, and LIMK1. These same genes, when mutated in humans, are associated with a condition called Williams syndrome, a rare disorder characterized by extreme sociability, near complete absence of social fear, and an overwhelming compulsive drive to connect with other people. Dogs, in other words, may have been domesticated partly because they evolved a kind of neurological openness to social bonding, that is, at the genetic level, analogous to a human condition defined by the inability not to trust. This is not metaphor, this is genomics. And it is the first layer of something far deeper. Because once you accept that dogs did not simply become obedient, that they became genuinely oriented toward human emotional life in a way that is written into their DNA, then everything you think you know about your dog changes. The question is no longer, do dogs feel things? The question is, what exactly do they feel?
And how close is it to what we feel?
For most of recorded history, the interior life of animals was considered a philosophical non-question. René Descartes, in the 17th century, articulated what became the dominant Western view. Animals are biological machines. They react. They do not feel. Pain in a dog, Descartes suggested, is like the sound of a clock. It is a mechanism, not an experience. This view shaped Western science for centuries. It shaped how we ran laboratories, how we designed farms, how we structured our relationship with the animal world. And it is, according to current neuroscience, almost certainly wrong. In 2012, a group of neuroscientists from some of the world's leading research institutions, Cambridge, Harvard, Max Planck, gathered and signed what became known as the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. The declaration stated, formally and publicly, that non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, possess the neurological substrates necessary for conscious states. This was not a soft claim. This was the scientific community saying in unambiguous language, these animals are aware, they experience their lives. For dogs specifically, the evidence goes considerably further. In 2011, neuroscientist Gregory Burns at Emory University did something that had never been done before. He trained dogs, awake, unrestrained, not sedated, to lie still inside a functional MRI machine. What he then did was measure their brain activity in response to stimuli, the smell of their owner, the smell of a stranger, the sound of familiar words. The results were striking. When dogs detected the scent of a familiar human, their owner, there was significant activation in the caudate nucleus. This is the region of the brain associated in humans with the anticipation of pleasure, positive emotion, and social reward. The same region lights up in a human brain when you see the face of someone you love. The same region shows activation in studies of human romantic attachment. The dogs were not merely reacting. Something in their neurology was responding to the presence of a specific person in a way that looks, from the inside, remarkably like what we call affection. But here is where it becomes even more interesting. Because dogs do not just feel toward humans in a generalized way. They feel specifically. They individuate. They remember. A study from the University of Lincoln in the United Kingdom found that dogs can distinguish between different human emotional expressions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, not just from voice, but from facial expression alone. What made this study particularly rigorous is that the researchers used photographs of unfamiliar human faces. The dogs had no prior association with these people. They were reading emotion as an abstract capacity, the way a highly emotionally intelligent human might look at a stranger's face and understand immediately that something is wrong. Dogs are the only non-primate species known to do this reliably. But the emotional architecture of a dog goes deeper still. Consider what happens when a dog is separated from its owner. Research from the Royal Veterinary College in London found that dogs separated from their primary attachment figure show measurable increases in cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Their heart rates elevate. Their behavior patterns show signs of distress that are clinically consistent with what psychologists call separation anxiety. And critically, these responses are owner-specific. They are not triggered by separation from any human or any living being. They are triggered by the absence of the one particular person the dog has formed an attachment to. This is not generalized distress. This is grief. And it is at this point that the science begins to intersect with something far older, the question of what dogs actually understand about human life and what human life has come to mean to them.
There is a moment that every dog owner recognizes. You are having a bad day. You have not said anything. You have not made a particular sound or gesture. You are sitting quietly in a room, and your dog comes to you. Comes without being called, leans against you or puts its head in your lap, or simply lies down beside you with that particular quality of stillness that feels less like an animal at rest and more like a presence choosing to stay. Science has begun to explain this moment, and the explanation is, in some ways, more extraordinary than the intuition. A study published in the journal Learning and Behavior found that dogs track human emotional states through a combination of olfactory cues. They can literally smell changes in cortisol levels in human sweat, and fine-grained behavioral observation. A dog that has lived with you for years has built an internal model of your normal emotional baseline. They know what you look like when you are fine, and they know with surprising precision when that has changed. This is not instinct in the reflexive sense. This is something closer to empathy, not identical to human empathy, but structurally similar, functionally overlapping, evolved to serve the same social purpose. And this capacity did not develop in the wild, it developed specifically in relationship with humans. There is a famous comparison that researchers return to repeatedly: the social intelligence of dogs versus wolves raised identically in captivity. When both are tested on tasks that require reading human cues, following a pointed finger, understanding a human gaze, interpreting a human communicative gesture, dogs consistently and dramatically outperform wolves. Even wolf puppies raised from birth alongside humans, given every possible opportunity to learn, cannot match the performance of young dogs who have had minimal human contact. The difference is not training, the difference is evolution. Dogs were shaped over tens of thousands of years to read us, to understand us, to build their lives around the interpretation of human social behavior. This raises a question that is uncomfortable in its implications. If dogs evolved to understand us, if their entire cognitive architecture was tuned generation by generation to model human emotional life, then what does this say about the relationship? What is it really when you strip away the language of ownership and pets and domestication? It is, the evidence suggests, something closer to a co-evolutionary bond, a relationship that changed both parties. Because the archaeological and anthropological record is clear, dogs did not simply benefit from proximity to humans. Humans benefited profoundly from proximity to dogs. In hunter-gatherer societies, dogs served as early warning systems, as hunting partners, as thermal warmth on cold nights. But there is growing evidence that the relationship was also psychological, that living alongside an animal capable of emotional attunement, capable of reading your face, tracking your mood, staying close during distress, may have provided something that researchers now describe as a form of social buffering, a reduction in physiological stress responses that comes specifically from the presence of a trusted social partner. Studies in modern contexts confirm this. Dog owners show lower resting cortisol levels than non-dog owners. They recover from cardiovascular stress events more quickly. They show lower rates of depression and anxiety in longitudinal studies. Children raised with dogs show stronger immune systems and, in multiple studies, higher scores on measures of empathy and social competence. The dog did not simply enter human civilization. The dog became part of the infrastructure of human psychological health. And here is where the weight of that begins to settle. Because we have taken something extraordinary, a conscious, emotionally complex being that evolved specifically to form a bond with us, and we have built a world that, in many respects, is poorly suited to everything that makes a dog what it is.
Return to Capitan, lying on that grave in Budapest. What we understand now that we did not understand clearly a generation ago is that his behavior was not anomalous. It was not a curiosity, a fluke, an exception that made for a touching news story. It was, instead, a visible manifestation of a neurological and emotional architecture that every healthy dog carries. Dogs form primary attachments, deep, specific, neurologically encoded attachments to particular humans. And those attachments, when severed, by death, by rehoming, by abandonment, produce in dogs something that the behavioral literature now describes without hesitation as grief. This matters. It matters because approximately 3.1 million dogs enter animal shelters in the United States every year, according to the ASPCA. Of those, approximately 390,000 are euthanized annually, a number that has declined significantly over the past 2 decades, which is genuinely good news. But the 3.1 million figure is the one to sit with. 3.1 million animals whose attachment bonds have been severed, who are placed into environments of confinement and uncertainty, carrying a neurological system evolved for closeness and now experiencing its opposite. Research from the University of Bristol found that shelter dogs show cortisol spikes beginning within the first hour of arrival that do not fully normalize even after weeks of residence. The behavioral signs of distress, pacing, vocalization, self-directed repetitive behaviors are consistent with what psychologists describe in human subjects experiencing social isolation and attachment disruption. These are not unhappy animals in a casual sense. These are animals in a state that the science now forces us to call suffering. And this is not only true of shelter dogs, because the majority of the world's 900 million domestic dogs, according to estimates from the World Animal Health Organization, are not kept as companions in the Western sense. They are free-roaming street dogs, or loosely kept working dogs, or animals whose relationship with humans is defined by proximity without the depth of social bond that dog cognition is optimized to seek. What does it mean to create a mind shaped entirely around social bonding and then place it in a world where the bond is not reliably available? This question is not rhetorical. It has a scientific dimension, because the neurological consequences of early social deprivation in dogs parallel in striking ways the consequences of early social deprivation in humans. Research from the University of Pennsylvania found that puppies separated from their mothers and littermates before 7 weeks of age show measurably higher rates of anxiety, aggression, and maladaptive behavior across their lifetimes. The critical developmental window, the period during which the social brain is being calibrated, follows the same general logic in dogs as in humans. The early social environment writes itself into the animal. This is the part of the emotional truth that is hardest to sit with. Not the extraordinary capacity of dogs to feel, but the gap between what they are capable of feeling and what the world we have made for them actually provides.
There is a concept in evolutionary biology called the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. It refers to the conditions, the social structures, the ecological pressures, the relational patterns under which a species evolved, and to which its biology is therefore calibrated. Humans, for instance, evolved in small social groups of around 150 individuals. Our neurology was shaped by that context. When we live in isolation or in the depersonalized scale of modern cities, we often feel it as a kind of friction, a background wrongness, because the environment no longer matches the evolutionary blueprint. Dogs evolved in relationship with humans. Their environment of evolutionary adaptedness is, uniquely among all animals on Earth, defined by us, by our faces, our voices, our emotional states, our company. What this means is that a dog living in a genuinely loving, stable, engaged human home is, in a precise biological sense, living in the environment it was built for. And a dog living in deprivation, isolation, or instability is experiencing a form of mismatch between what its neurology expects and what its actual life provides that produces measurable distress. Capitan lay on a grave because the person who structured his world, who provided the social reality around which his entire existence was organized, was gone. He did not understand death in the way we do. He did not have language for absence. What he had was the drive, deep, structural, neurologically encoded, to be present for the bond. And so he stayed. There is something in that which resists the comfortable categories. He was not being loyal in the way a soldier is loyal, through choice and obligation.
He was being loyal the way water is wet, because it is what he was at the deepest level of his biology. The science of the last 20 years has done something irreversible. It has made it impossible for anyone paying attention to continue treating the interior life of dogs as a philosophical gray zone. The instruments are too precise, the data is too consistent, the grief is too legible. What we owe to that legibility is a question that each person must answer individually, but it begins perhaps with the simple act of seeing clearly, of understanding that the animal lying at your feet or waiting by the door or pressing its head into the curve of your arm is not merely responding to you, it is experiencing you. It knows when you are sad before you have said anything. It carries the specific shape of your presence in a way that has no name in any language, and it lives, from the first day to the last, in a world entirely organized around the hope that you will stay close. The least we can do is understand what that means.